Hi, this is Tim Milburn. I'm on the steering committee with Chicago Area Clean Cities Coalition, and I'm going to be talking about a study that was commissioned late last year to look at readiness for sites along the Illinois corridors in the six-county area in northeastern Illinois, and talk about what we need to be ready for them. As I mentioned, we completed a study on alternative fuels along the northeastern Illinois corridors. I was the primary author. It was finished in May. The link below can provide you with a copy of this for free, or you can go to Chicago Area Clean Cities website and do the same. So basically the study started at looking at where are the alternative fuel sites in this part of the world. And based on that, we looked at where there were basically geospatial gaps between existing sites, so where there might be opportunities to perhaps site between them. We looked at capturing ideas through talking to a lot of people and some research. We basically organized a set of readiness success factors and compiled it in a report. And I'll go a little further into that in a second. I wanted to give you a sense of the study. The corridors involved is basically the Illinois Department of Transportation, the roads in red, and the tollway in blue. And basically these are all the roads that we looked at. And these are the geographical area we focus on, which is Cook, DuPage, Lake, Kane, McHenry, and Will counties, as shown. And these are the fuels we looked at: electricity at level 2 and DC fast charging, CNG, LNG, LPG, hydrogen, E85, and B20. So to expand a little bit, as we got into this, the 6 counties, we realized that vehicles go in and out of the 6 counties from within Illinois and from states in the Midwest. So we looked at maps in that entire region. We looked at the gaps based on what's called the FHWA, which is Federal Highway Administration, part of the Department of Transportation. They have a program that defines what's called readiness for a given fuel. I'll show you in a second. And then we listened to a lot of people, did some research, reviewed some online tools to inform siting. And then we looked at these siting readiness success factors. I won't go through all these, we're going to cover them in later slides. But the point here is it's not just about where the location is. There's many other parameters that get involved in making a site successful. This was all documented, all the results, recommendations, some trends that were identified, and some recommendations for next steps. And just to give you a snapshot, this is what the Federal Highway Administration recommends as a criteria for readiness. So this is how we based our mapping. We looked at, again, the existing ones and where the gaps are. So as an example, just looking at the EVs, the rules are you only do DC fast chargers. The distance or the proximity to the nearest station is designated as 50 miles, and the stations have to be within 5 miles from the highway, public stations only, and no Tesla charging. So that is the basis of the FHWA. We added level 2 EV charging, B20 and E85 to the list for mapping to kind of see where those fuels lie as well. And just again, another example, this is the DC fast charger in the 6 counties. And we looked at, again, the readiness, where the gaps are. And we kind of looked at, were we within this 50-mile proximity? And in this case, you can see with a 25-mile radius, there's quite a few charging stations in this part of Illinois, with the exception of the northwest county of McHenry and such, where there are some gaps. The other thing to note is there are 2 types of DC fast chargers, something called SAE combo charging, or CCS, which is the US standard, and there's a Japanese standard called CHAdeMO, and there are some stations that actually have 1 of each. And this is the tally of the data in the 6 counties. So we have all these major interstates that are, and tollways that are ready, and there's also 3 roads that don't meet the criteria. And then the tally below, you can see there's quite a few that have both the CCS and the CHAdeMO available. Another parameter we looked at was wayfinding signage. So the part of this program that FHWA has is for these 5 fuels on the left that they want to also include wayfinding signage, which is basically like gasoline or diesel. When you exit, it says there's whatever EV or CNG fuel at this exit. IDOT is looking seriously at this, doing it, and the tollway doesn't have current plans, but both agreed it was worthwhile when we had the conversations. This is something that's probably coming in the future. And why would we do this? Basically, it assists motorists, just like if you're looking for gasoline on the highway, it lets you know it's up and coming. It also helps educate the public that these alternative fuels are installed and operational. And it illustrates the government is in support of these alternative fuels. A couple of tools I'm going to go through quickly just to give you a sense of what's out there to help inform good siting decisions. One is called AADT, or Average Annual Daily Traffic. Basically, it says it takes all the traffic on a given road at a given location, divides it by 365 to give you basically the traffic flow. In this case, we're looking at the north end of where 294 and 94 meet, there's 179,000 vehicles per day, and of those, 35,000 are trucks. And it's a lot of data, and this is how it was presented. So you can see that there's a distribution of AADT, and this is for all traffic. There's similar data for just the trucks, and this can be used to inform someone selecting a site as to where traffic is and isn't. Another interesting tool for electric vehicle infrastructure is called EVI Pro Lite. It takes the population of plug-in electric vehicles and then determines what charging requirements for residential, workplace, and public charging. This is a tool developed by the U.S. Department of Energy and on the Alternative Fuel Data Center website. Focuses on level 2 and direct current fast chargers. And the idea is that you input the total number of plug-in hybrids versus battery only or BEVs. You look at what are the ranges of those groups. You have a split between level 2 and DC fast chargers, and you can input the geographical area by zip code, by county, by municipality, state, etc. And what it does is it calculates based on an algorithm the number of workplace and public level 2 chargers and public DC fast chargers. The screen on the right is the input screen. And I ran some examples kind of to exercise the tool. And basically, the input screen, you break it down by percentages of plug-in hybrids at 20-mile range, plug-in hybrids at 50-mile range, et cetera. And I ran 4 different scenarios to basically predict the distribution of EV chargers. And on the left side, it's the thousands of plug-in electric, so 50,000 to 500,000 as the number of vehicles grow in Illinois. And basically, this is the results that came out in a graphical form. And it basically says that if we get to 500,000 plug-in electric vehicles, we're going to be somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 DC fast chargers needed. And again, that's based on this set of assumptions. And also the governor's goal has been stated as 1 million EVs by 2030. So in essence, this prediction, if accurate, is halfway there. So it gives you an idea of the amount of infrastructure that we may be needing. One other really important part was I talked to 45 people in 23 sessions from a range of stakeholders, the fleet people, rideshare companies, the corridor authorities, the gas and electric utilities, retail refuelers, and a range of other subject matter experts. And what did we learn? And I'm going to kind of excerpt what we learned on the EV. There was a number of other things came out for the other alternatives, but this is a focus on the EV. So from an EV owner perspective, the most important thing is infrastructure ubiquity. You want to be able to get refueled, and you want that to be reliable. You want to make sure when you pull in for a charge that there's one available, and which basically often implies you need redundancy in the charging numbers. Without that, you don't have the fleets as they are coming online to have the confidence to invest in the alternative fuel vehicles. They have to be able to know they can continue their operations. It has to meet their economics, of course. also amenities, food and drink and parking, etc. The perception of the fleets in particular, and I think passenger vehicles, is the total cost of ownership has to compete with petroleum. And the duration of refill for the same range should be reasonably close. And this is one of the challenges of the electric vehicle industry right now and the charging industry. And when you look at the definition of success, it basically depends on whether you're talking to a business with a fleet or a passenger, and whether this owner would be charging at a home base or using public EV charging. The sites themselves, a lot of comments on this 5-mile adjacency criteria that generally was rejected. The half-mile is what the fleets want in particular. And the 50-mile proximity between stations is somewhat arbitrary. It is helpful, but as I showed an earlier list, there are a lot of other factors that actually may dominate a decision. Traffic flow, that AADT along the corridor itself and the crossroads is a critical factor. Because currently it takes a while to recharge, having access to other services such as retail and food helps. And collaboration is something that came out in many conversations. So when you deal with talking between the users, the EV drivers, the planners, policy investment, the utilities are very important. There has to be a lot of conversations between the parties. A number of people suggested that being creative with the financing, depending on the project, engaging public-private partnerships, tax instrument financing on properties, the property assessed clean energy allowance in Illinois, opportunity zones, and other things. And one of the interesting things about the electric vehicle market is there's technology built into the vehicles, the communicating with the internet, and it really can enable the EV recharging market as well as it can support customer logistical and operational needs. So some other general things. So the recharging sites, for them to be successful investments, it depends on the perspectives. So vehicle owners, it's a big difference if you're a fleet or a passenger vehicle. The road itself, whether it's within an urban area or between urban areas, which is the corridors, or a rural site, how the fees are structured. Some places might use fees as a service to draw people or make it free. Others cover the cost of the electricity. Others want to generate revenue. Big difference in strategy and siting when it comes to home-based recharging versus public recharging. The rideshare companies have kind of a unique perspective. They're talking to utilities around the country to see if they can strike special deals, so when their rideshare drivers go home at night, they might be able to get a better rate on electricity. And they're also looking at green applications so that their riders can select them as an EV driver and perhaps pay a premium. There's also everybody has a role to play, and they all have different perspectives in terms of the stakeholders in a project. The key is the range is defined by who's in the project, but this varies from site to site and project to project. One thing I did hear that even though the other alternative fuels are still of interest and still important, electrification is the top of the mind for all or most of the stakeholders I spoke with. A lot of it has to do because it's seen as the best solution for climate mitigation. And other alternative fuels still are considered bridge fuels, but these fleets that are on other alternatives are looking at electrification to see how it unfolds. And education is an essential factor at all levels for all stakeholders. On the policy side, we looked at a number of things depending on who you are in the set of stakeholders. Everyone agreed that clear and effective incentives are required for the vehicles themselves, for the infrastructure, and for the fuel, for the electricity. This needs to be clear. Tied to that is the tax and tariffs that support the EV market growth. We don't want to be overtaxing or applying heavy power rates while we're trying to develop an EV market. I think there's general agreement that there needs to be a reasonable, fair means of monetizing greenhouse gases to decarbonize transportation while reducing emissions. And there has to be a rule set so that there's a level playing field and these programs and projects are rolled out safely. And a couple more, people kind of commented that we need to have alignment of policies from the federal to the state to the local and county governments so that there's an alignment so we can get these projects up and running without creating barriers between governments. These rules and policies need to be broadly communicated to the stakeholders and the general public. There has to be support for underserved communities, and there needs to be plans at the policy level to provide rollout for medium to large vehicle electrification. Now this is kind of a busy chart, but it shows all the participants in the electric vehicle ecosystem. And the idea here is that in order for these things to succeed, these different parties have to communicate with each other. And bigger projects probably mean more collaboration, but the technology providers have to work with utilities, as does the site ownership. The users have to work with the technology providers. The government has to set the stage for the level playing field. And there's a whole community of people that are dealing with education and enabling projects through knowledge and action. So I'm going to kind of summarize the site success attributes, starting with we need electric vehicles, we need the demand side. There has to be enough traffic to support a site. There has to be access, ingress, and egress. There has to be ways of meeting the driver needs, whether that be food or shopping. Station operation, it has to fit the needs, the hours, and capacities of the EVs coming. It's helpful to have nearby places to visit while you're waiting for your charge, or to draw people to the area. The competitive profile has to be considered as more and more ubiquity is developed. We're going to see more and more EV chargers, and somebody siting one has to pay attention to the nearest ones. You need physical space and probably a plan for the future physical space if this site will grow. Safety and security are important. Truck parking is for truck fleets, especially the over-road, is an essential component of a site for these larger facilities. Communication, as I mentioned, there's new tools out there. The ability for the driver to know if there's a charger available and what power level and whether it fits his or her vehicle. That's all available now and becomes an integral part of the solution. The business case, as always, it has to make sense for the station, for the fleet owner, for the passenger, for that matter, passenger vehicle. So there's a lot of parameters that go into the business case. I mentioned collaborators. There's often equity goals for lower income. Capacity and utility and the grid access kind of go together. How big is the plant? How big will it be in the future? What are the utility rates to be able to fuel the electric vehicles? Does the site have access to the grid? If so, can additional capacity be brought through the existing grid? Does the grid need to be modified? Should integration of renewables, solar and wind, be considered, or energy storage? And then oftentimes, for some kinds of projects, sustainability goals are part of the solution. Just kind of on the supply and demand, this is one of the challenges we all face as we move forward. So on the demand side, you've got the vehicle groups. Right now it's predominantly passenger vehicles, but more and more there's buses being added, electric trucks of all sizes, mostly right now medium duty, but that's probably going to change in the future. And each of those vehicles has a different usage profile. A passenger vehicle, might drive 12,000 miles a year, typically on highways. A fleet vehicle has to worry about their load. Can they pull certain things? How many miles can they drive? How does that impact their daily routine? And then the road itself, you'll have different demand profiles depending on whether you're in the city, or on the corridor, in a rural area. And that has to be balanced with the station supply. So for a given set of demand groups combined, the station has to be able to meet that in terms of capacity, kilowatts available, redundancy, and the utility has to be able to supply that. So ultimately, as the market grows, this is a balancing act. We're going to have to be developing utility supply to supply the station as the demand grows. And this is a dynamic factor, because this balance between the two has been and continues to change with time, and those changes will be probably increasingly dramatic as we move forward. So just to wrap up, what came out of the study in terms of recommendations, one was to leverage all the good input from the stakeholders and take actions. As an example, we're talking about developing, deploying siting and design guidelines for different types of sites. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about some of those ideas. The mapping that was done focused on basically geography, but all those other factors can be mapped to locate different types of ready to success. So we're looking at having a multi-parametric approach to maybe better inform siting. We're looking at convening collaborative forums such as today, and working with utilities collectively to think about this dynamic balance of the grid needs with the growing demand. And finally, we think that the wayfinding signage is a good thing and should be applied on Illinois corridors. And another comment that came up a number of times was encourage safety training of first responders. There's a lot of new technologies, and having our first responders able to deal with them is a good idea. And with that, I want to thank you. This is my contact information for both my business called Green Ways to Go and my email at chicagocleancities.org. Thank you so much.